So now, Charles, you know, your introduction, we've touched base on how you're currently separated. And
Mm-hmm.
you once told me that there's a lot of things that you had not, you and I are personal friends. You said that there's a lot of things that you had not learned before getting married, and in turn, that negatively affected your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
However, you have expressed that you try to help and mentor many single people, just like Lady Yola and Pastor Sai, to help them be careful of making the same mistakes. What are some things that you try to help people do differently than you did?
Well, first off, let me say, I always tell myself, man, if I would have met Pastor Side Lady Yola before marriage, I'd be a totally different person. Um, I constantly try to get people to tell them about like not rushing, not getting too caught up in your emotions or feelings. I really try to tell single people to choose wisely. Here's a really big one. I try to get people to understand is being content in your singleness. Because if you're not content over time, you'll start getting desperate, you'll start settling, you just kind of be out of order. Um, and a lot of people don't understand what being content in singleness really means. Um, that doesn't mean, oh, um I'm not in a relationship, but I'm still talking to people, going on a few dates here and there, or I'm still talking to somebody on the phone. No, when I say be content in your singleness, I mean be content with you don't need anybody. Like like you ain't got a date for an extended amount of time and it's just you and God and you're just working on yourself and you're not even worried about if you're not even worried about men or women. And I have to admit, I didn't truly learn that contentment until me and my wife were separated. I saw that my wife had become an idol because when things weren't going right between us, it dictated my emotions. I would be blown by the wind. However, through separation, when I finally gave it to God and gave him complete control of my life, I finally had reached a point where I was content with being alone. And thank God we were separated during that time and not divorced. Because if we were divorced, I would have just started dating again. But with us being separated during that time and legally married, but I couldn't talk to her because she wouldn't, I mean, she ignoring me. So with that, I was forced to be in a place where I'm like, I can't date. I can't talk to her. It's just me and God. And then I developed this contentment. And even to this day, I always say, man, it feels good not to need a woman to be happy. And I don't know, I just fall more and more in love with God every day. Honestly, sometimes I even think, man, when my wife comes back, how am I going to keep giving God as much as I'm giving him? Because the Bible talks about, when you marry, your time is divided because you're married. But yeah, value that singleness. Actually be alone and spend time working on yourself and being with God. That's one thing I try to teach people. And choosing wisely. Because a lot of times you fall in love and you make decisions based on that feeling of love. And then once you make that covenant, listen, Jesus says, if you divorce someone and marry another, you committed adultery. Jesus is trying to get us to understand, listen, marriage is a lifelong covenant. It's not something you just break because you're not happy and go to the next person. No, Jesus is saying, listen, you get one shot, choose wisely.
So, can you paint this picture for us of what it's like to just be with God? What's your experience of why being in your singleness or being separated? Just being with God.
The most amazing feeling ever. So hard to describe. It's just like this joy. It's just like I tell you, I talk to God all the time. We just talk, talk, talk. We hang out. We have a good time. Everything that I was lacking in my marriage, I decide to find in Him. I go on dates with God. Like I'll sit at the park and eat and talk to Him. Um, Sometimes I go out to eat and talk to him in my head because I don't want people to think I'm crazy. But yeah, it just looks like having this just amazing relationship. And as I'm learning to be his son more and more, it's like he just keeps revealing more and more. And the more I see his glory, that's all I need. Like, I'll be honest with you, now, Lord, please don't make this the case. But if I got to be a eunuch for the kingdom, I'm willing to be a eunuch for the kingdom.
Hey, that's a bold statement. That's bold. God's proud of you. um. Okay, so the next question. Okay. What do you think, specifically you, Charles?
Mm.
Um, how are people supposed to know if the person is sent from God or not?
Prayer. That has a lot to do with prayer for multiple reasons too. Um, you got to have a prayer life. First reason being you need to know God's will for your life. You need to know if this is a season of singleness. You need to know if God is ready for you to step out and start dating. And I'm saying this to some of you watching. Somebody watching tonight, God is saying you need to start stepping out there. You've been single too long. That's for somebody, you know who you are. But having a prayer life, because sometimes God is saying, I want you to be single right now. Sometimes God is saying, I'm actually ready for you to start dating again. But if you're not praying, pray without ceasing. You should be constantly praying, constantly talking to God and listening to him. You won't know his will for your life. And I'm gonna give you an example. Um, for those of you who do not know, December 12th, 2022, um, I ended up being a divorced man. My divorce was finalized. And it had been 2 years, so it didn't hit me too hard. I left the court, honestly. My mind was like, man, can I start dating again? And I asked God, man, can I start dating again? And Pastor Sai can tell you because I asked him too. Um, but God told me, he said, no. He said, this is a season of singleness. He said, this is an extended season of singleness. This is not for a few weeks. This is not for a few months. This is an extended season of singleness. And then he told me to keep putting my ring on every day because he's bringing my wife back. But this is why I'm saying prayer is important, because when the temptation rises or I see opportunities present themselves, or if I just want to date, I know what God told me. He said, no, he said, this is a season of singleness. And he said, don't date anybody because I'm bringing your wife back. So because I know what God's will for my life is, I can make certain decisions based on what he's telling me. So for people that are out there, when these opportunities are presenting themselves, you need to first ask God, what's your will for me in this season? And that'll help you determine whether the person is sent by God or not. Because if it's during the season of singleness, they're probably not sent by God. And if they are, he's testing you to see if you're going to be faithful to him. Another thing I would also say is, let's say it is time for you to start dating again. How do I determine that this person is from God? Again, prayer. You need to be praying about the person. And you need to be evaluating, judging the person. We judge a tree by the fruit that it bears, looking at how they're handling things in life. How are they handling the bad times? How are they handling things when they go through stuff? How are they treating the people around them? How do they handle the word of God? How do they live as a Christian? Because not everybody that says that they're a believer is really a believer. So you have to pay attention to how this person is living and acting and determine whether this is something you want to deal with. And you still got to be talking to God. Lord, is this somebody you want me with? And he'll tell you. If you are not in a covenant, if you are not married, and I'm not talking about you divorced, I mean, you've been single, you unmarried, or you're engaged, but you've never been married, and you are suffering, you need to get out. You need to leave. You are not in a covenant. And if you sign that dotted line, you're signing up for suffering. That person is showing you who they are. Don't go through suffering unless there is a covenant. So I just wanted to make sure I made that clear.